Hello, everyone, and thank you, Tim, for the Nespresso love. I'm going to walk you through a couple of case studies before Almar and I get into a hearty discussion. But I never want to take it for granted that everyone knows who Nespresso is. I love to think that it goes without saying that we have so many fans in the room, but we are a luxury premium single-serve coffee brand. And we also like to think of ourselves as a bit of a lifestyle brand. And I think that's the piece that I really want to touch on today. What does that mean? I think it's a bit of a buzzword. And the hypothesis that we'll share through some case studies is that being a lifestyle brand is not just creating a Nespresso lifestyle that you asked your customers to buy into. It's also not a single lifestyle that you're going and tapping into. Our consumers are really diverse and have a lot of different interests. And so really thinking about what is their lifestyle and how, if and how, your brand can naturally fit into those subcultures. So that's what we'll talk about. But let's start at the beginning, which is Gen Z. It's the thing that's on the tip of everyone's tongue as marketers. And I think we do ourselves a bit of a disservice when we look at Gen Z as a single thing, and we generalize, right, a swath of our population. And again, maybe that goes without saying, but Gen Z is really diverse. They are fiercely independent, and I don't think they want to be talked about as just Gen Z. And so thinking back to the idea of a lifestyle brand, you have to really understand Gen Z at a deeper level if you're going to tap into the things they care about and naturally try to find ways for coffee to fit into their lifestyle. And so the way we think about that at Nespresso is, instead of just placing ourselves as Nespresso alongside of the things they care about, I think that's almost an archaic way of thinking about marketing in some ways. I was just listening to Gary Vee speak at the Possible conference a week or two ago, and he said you used to, in the traditional world of TV buying, you wish in a prayer that content will perform super well, and you place your ad next to it and hope that the consumer will make the connection. The beautiful thing about modern digital marketing is that actually you don't have to do that. You might still do it, and we still do participate in that model. But there's new and different ways to think about how you inject your brand in a really natural and authentic way, again, to tap into what we know is core about Gen Z. So this is our hypothesis, that our role as marketers at Nespresso is to find ways to inject the brand into culture, try to make bets on what are those subcultures and cultural moments that our target audience is going to care about, and find ways to naturally integrate the brand there. So with that, I'll walk you through 3 case studies about how we're doing that. The first one might make you scratch your head a little bit. It certainly did for me, coffee and gaming. I think it's fair to say that a lot of people in this room, maybe you're a gamer, but it's a little bit of a subculture that people have preconceived notions about, myself included. When the team brought me the idea, I really questioned it and said, why would we show up on Twitch? That does not make sense for a luxury coffee brand, right? But last year we launched our smallest footprint virtual machine, which means that great coffee can fit anywhere, including right next to you while you're doing your gaming console. I'm sorry, I'm not a gamer, so I really should not try to purport like I understand what they're going through. But if you think about the culture, they're up late at night, they're doing streaming, and they don't want to get up and walk away from their activity. And so what better way to have your fuel, your caffeine ready to go than with an espresso machine, small footprint right next to you while you're gaming. And so enter our test with Twitch. This is just a little sample of the content that we created. And again, going back to the idea, we didn't just place Nespresso inside a game. That was really popular in the worlds of meta universes and things like that. We didn't just run an ad. We actually worked with a Twitch creator here, you see, to have her talk about how Nespresso naturally fits into her gaming lifestyle. And the great news is, still early days. We're doing some tests with our friends over at GroupM, but it's performing really well. It's beating the Twitch benchmarks and showcasing, I think, how when you rethink how to authentically show up as part of a subculture, not just advertise around it, you can really make an impact. The next one, you're probably sitting there thinking, what do you mean? Hollywood is mainstream. It's the very opposite of a subculture. But the reality is it's really meant to show just the breadth of how Nespresso thinks about fandom. At certain moments in the year, especially during award season, There's probably a ton more people than average thinking about movies, watching the Oscar nominees. And so, again, with Hollywood stars in many of our TV commercials, including George Clooney, and I cannot do an Nespresso presentation without using his name, it's true. The question becomes, we could, again, run ads during the Oscars, but nobody's, pounding down the door excited about the commercials that are going to run during the Oscars. Not that you shouldn't buy them, but how might we think about Hollywood and movie culture in a different way? And so enter our partnership with Condé Nast. We sponsored the Vanity Fair Oscars after party. Again, we didn't just show up there with our logo. We brought Nespresso martinis to arguably one of the chicest, most luxurious nights in Hollywood. And again, we didn't just do it in a way that we served to the lucky few who were at the event. We created content that showcased how Nespresso can bring that experience of the Oscars at home to you as a user. You can see, if you have not tried this at home, or if you don't have an espresso machine, you can see just how easy it is to make an espresso martini. And again, similarly, this content performed really well because, of course, I think it's beautiful, it's engaging, but it also allows you to feel like a part of that culture, even at home in your own kitchen. So again, what does coffee have to do with the movies? We can make that connection and find easy ways to tell that story if we're creative with the channels and the content and the formats. And lastly, hopefully you were among the millions of people who streamed the Netflix Cup last fall. It's a project that was near and dear to my heart because it was a first of its kind. If you don't know, the Netflix Cup was a cultural moment in live sports that Netflix created, pairing F1 drivers and PGA Tour golfers in a live golf tournament that was streamed on Netflix. We signed up, again, at the urging of our friends at GroupM, to be one of the first ever sponsors. But again, why sports? What does coffee have to do with sports? If maybe a decade ago we wanted to dip our toe into sports and think like that might be an interesting group of consumers that we haven't tapped into, you might go sponsor a tournament, you might go run ads during Monday Night Football. We also do that. But this presented an opportunity to authentically connect with a cultural moment, right? We believed that Netflix was going to create something that consumers were going to care about. And by associating ourselves with that content and integrating ourselves in a meaningful way, which meant on-site activation, it meant interstitials like you see here, not your traditional ads, actually sponsoring the unforgettable moments of the live sporting event. It allowed us to tap into sports in a really different way. And so I'm quoting myself here, but I think it's a really good way to wrap up the case study, which is sports sponsorships and partnerships probably are confusing for if you don't know much about why and how we're tapping into these subcultures. But I think it's the unexpected nature that makes Gen Z stop in their tracks and think twice about you. It makes them curious, but it also is not forcing ourselves on top of their streaming, their viewing. It's saying, how can we best integrate into your lifestyle? Again, going back to that gaming example, I think it's really ripe for that. And so, there's one more little video of what we did. You see, we created a golf cart that was serving iced coffee at the event. We partnered with an LPGA golfer as well as an influencer to showcase the experience behind the scenes at the Netflix Cup Live. And where I'll land is just in summary before we get into some more questions and conversation. If I think about Gen Z and what they're looking for, we talked about authenticity being key for them. What I didn't touch on was that they live in a near state of perma-crisis, as I like to call it. They are just going through so much. They've been through so much, as we all have. And so they're really looking for meaningful connections and authenticity from brands. And that means rethinking your traditional advertising approach, and that's where subcultures really come in for us. They're really looking for that personal experience. How do you relate to my life? Don't try to come on top and tell me what I should be doing or what I should be aspiring to be. They're really willful and independent. And then lastly, that idea of tapping into the cultural zeitgeist and figuring out how your brand meaningfully fits into the broader cultural conversation. So let's have a chat about it. Those are the case studies.
Let us chat. Thank you, Brand Innovators, for inviting me up here to moderate. Thank you, GroupM, for hosting this lovely event. And Jessica, thank you for allowing me to be on the stage.
Likewise.
So I thought it'd be great to just start with you. You have an incredible background. Your experience is wide-ranging. Let's start there. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I got my start in the advertising industry. That landscape has changed so much, so it sort of feels like a dinosaur when you say I worked at an agency that no longer exists, right? But I think that's what's so fascinating now about coming brand side and evolving and looking at the landscape. To move brand side, I actually specialized in social and digital. That's how I really got my foot in the door. I didn't follow that traditional path of going and getting your MBA and then becoming a brand manager. And not to date myself, but when I was doing social and digital, the typical brand manager didn't really care. They were like, yeah, you go do Instagram over there, and I'm doing brand marketing over here. And they were not related. And the reality is that's now where the world is consuming brand content, consuming all content, right? And so that really, I think, parlayed for me into a broader marketing career. I've worked at a variety of CPG and luxury brands, and Nespresso ended up being this perfect combination of the two landscapes. And that's why I've been there for 8 years now.
That's awesome. And as VP of Marketing and Head of Sustainability.
Yes.
2 roles.
Yes. Let's see how to explain that one. Well, first of all, I'm a marketer by trade. I am not a sustainability practitioner. However, the thing to know about Nespresso, and I really like to dismantle any misperceptions about Nespresso, is that it actually makes sense, maybe only at Nespresso. There are probably a few brands where it makes sense to have the head of marketing and head of sustainability in one role. And it's because we are sustainable to our core. It is in our DNA for 30, 40 years now. We've always cared about the entire value chain of our coffee. I think when you work in food, you sort of naturally have to be, or had to be maybe before other industries were expected to be, to the point where if we don't protect where our coffee is coming from and who's farming it, coffee literally will not exist in 50 years. So it's not as if we're altruistic in our sustainability endeavors. We are trying to protect our business at the end of the day. And inherently, then you protect the people and the environment that go with it. And so it's so core to how we communicate and market as a brand that about a year ago, my boss asked me to do both at the same time.
It's amazing. I did not know much about Nespresso, and as I was diving into all the information and just learning about all the things that are important to your company, the business, and the core. So let's take this sustainability and in relation to Gen Z. We know Gen Z; they are, to your point, they have their own minds, their interests, so social impact, things of that nature. How has that been communicating sustainability with the younger generation?
Yeah, I mean, it's completely changing, right? I think one of the biggest ahas we had as a brand was when we looked at our, again, digging deeper than just the tropes, right, of a typical generational view. We looked at how they think about sustainability, and they care and think much more about the social side. If you think about ESG, I think we are trained in the generation before or before that one to think about it from an almost purely environmental perspective. But then you think about the racial reckoning that's happened in the U.S. specifically. You think about the landscape of diversity that they're growing up in, and the idea of social justice and social impact becomes increasingly important. It's not as if the environmental piece goes away. They're also dealing with the fact that the world is falling apart, and they're going to be the ones to have to deal with that, not us. Right. But the role of social impact and social sustainability mindset is really key to them. And so a couple of years ago, when that was really starting to pick up traction here in the US during the pandemic, we looked at that and we said, okay, let's first start with our employees. And let's think about what are the causes from a social worldview standpoint that they really care about, because they're kind of a microcosm of our consumer at the end of the day. And when we were all working through the pandemic, you needed to have extra care and attention for your employees. So we created employee resource groups like many companies did, which were organized by our employees around the topics that they cared most about. We then sort of connected our internal values with how we communicate externally and created social impact programming, including a dedicated headcount in the marketing team that's sole role is to focus on how our marketing drives social impact. So works with 4 or 5 nonprofits that are consistent partners every year that, again, similar to the subculture conversation, may not have anything to do with coffee. I'll give the example of the Ali Forney Center. And if you're not familiar, the Ali Forney Center is the nation's largest LGBTQ youth homeless center for LGBTQ youth. Getting kicked out of your home and not accepted by your family is a huge problem. And again, people might look at that and say, but what does Nespresso have to do with homelessness and LGBTQ youth? But the reality is we stand for supporting communities. We stand for connection, and it doesn't matter who you are, you should have that support. And so, and that came from really deep seated within our employee base who had worked with the Ali Forney Center, who had volunteered with them. They're here in New York, so they're in our backyard from a corporate standpoint. And we turned that into an entire campaign and a artist partnership and a mug that we sold to help raise money. So it was a 360 effort. So I'm way far from the topic, but the idea that what Gen Z cares about, who our employees care about, what's true to our values, and how do you translate that into something that people will care about outside of your core product offering, I think is really key.
Awesome. Yeah, that is wonderful. I did read up on some of that stuff, and it's amazing what you guys are doing there. So Gen Zs, it's interesting. My wife and I were talking the other day about how we consume coffee. Very different than the Gen Z group. I'm reminded by all the Gen Zs. Look, I'm not wearing socks.
No socks. I love it.
So I'm old.
Exactly. I know now it's like socks up to your calves or something. I don't know.
It's incredible.
If you show your ankles, it's like gauche or something. I don't know. But I like it. It looks good.
So so we got into talking and just how coffee is part of our lives, how it's part of our ritual, and then looking at how this younger next generation and how they drink coffee, iced coffee, right? Gen Z and iced coffee, that is hand in hand, and what you guys are doing with Vertuo Pop. Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, as I was looking at that product, my 9-year-old daughter, who cannot drink coffee yet.
She wants the pink one, doesn't she?
No, she wants the Pacific Blue.
Oh, okay, I like that.
And at the price point, I've always thought when I looked at Nespresso in the past, it was
yes.
a high cost machine, and come to learn, it's $129.99.
Yeah,
very affordable. I love it. So and it is very small. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment, 3 kids, so we do not have a lot of space. And my wife and I fight over the counter space.
Oh yeah,
that's rough. Mm-hmm. But she's allowing us to get this.
Oh, I love to hear that. See,
I'm gonna hit you up for a discount later.
I'm gonna send you your $20 bill after this, Almar, because he's just doing my work for me.
But let's talk about you shared what you're doing around gaming, the film celebrity. The Nestlé Cup, amazing. I don't know if anyone has gotten to watch that show, but it was awesome. A nice
break
for me with Cocomelon. Yeah. I watch a lot of Cocomelon. If you guys have young kids, you'll know. So, but how did you determine? How did you lock into those groups specifically?
Yeah, I think the reality is it's constantly evolving is the first answer. And to that point, really understanding the consumer in terms of how they interact with your product or your category comes first, right? You said you started with iced coffee, and the simple statement I'll give you is my nieces who are Gen Z, they don't talk about it as iced coffee or cold coffee. That's how we talk about it as like a coffee company. They just say coffee and they mean it's iced, duh, right? Like so to know that deeply and intimately and study the next wave of coffee. The other thing is just to say, Gen Z was introduced to coffee in a fundamentally different way than we were. The way I was introduced to coffee was my parents were brewing a big, huge pot of Maxwell House at home. That was coffee.
That's what we do.
Yeah, and that's fine. No judgment, although we're going to upgrade you.
Yeah.
After this,
well, I'm just saying that I'm old, so I'm still stuck in those ways.
Yeah, and many of us are, but Gen Z, think about it. They were raised in a world where Starbucks is on every corner.
Yeah.
Anywhere you go. They were raised in a world of the third place, the coffee shop. All coffee was whitened, sweet, flavored, all of that. So fundamentally, their first place where they joined coffee is vastly different. And so the first step is understanding that. The second step is then getting the right innovation to address that target consumer. And the product innovation connected to that, whether it's a machine like Vertuo Pop, which again is colorful. We've never done Pacific Blue, Mango Yellow. Those colors do not exist in our brand ID, but we know we needed to do something different again to address Gen Z. So first is understanding your consumer, innovating against that. And then you say, okay, how am I going to communicate it in a way that actually sticks with them? And that's where some of these subcultures come into play. I never would have thought when I started at Nespresso that we'd be touching gaming, but you have to stay ahead of, again, not just that overarching picture of Gen Z, but actually what are these little pops and where might it make sense for our brand? That's the thing. There are probably tons of subcultures out there in Gen Z that it absolutely would not make sense for us to play in. There's not really an authentic way for us to play in certain spaces for sure. So it's always that sort of gut check of, can my brand fit there in a way, maybe not an obvious way, but in a way that makes sense. Again, obvious to me, gaming did not make sense. They're chugging a Red Bull probably. But then you're like, wait a second. Now I have a small footprint machine that could be right next to them while they're playing. And you test. And if the Twitch stuff hadn't worked, we would have said, great, that's an interesting test, move on, go to the next one. And this like iterative sort of fail fast, fail forward mindset is only enabled by a digital world where you don't have to do massive sports sponsorships to test sporting. You can do these incremental little gains and wins. I hope that answers the question.
It does. Well, yeah, a lot of the things that you guys are doing on that experiential side, or talking about that third place. You know, there was a special on Today's show. It was on Today.com actually, where I read about it, talking about that third place where you're not at work and you're not at home. Where is that special place? And you know, for what you're doing with Nespresso, you know, being in those areas where people are spending their time where they want to be is very cool. I want to talk about what you did at the Santa Monica Pier.
Yes,
that is cool.
That was really fun.
I don't know that I drink coffee there personally.
Exactly, that's the idea.
Tell the crowd, because that was an awesome execution you did there.
Yeah, so when we launched this virtual pop machine, which again, the entire positioning of it is it's the smallest and Gen Z targeted, and you need to do something to stop them, right? We were talking earlier, I heard scrolling, right? They're just inundated with content and feeds. And so how do you surprise them? And we were coming out of the pandemic and saying, okay, people are ready for in real life experiences again. And so the campaign idea around launching virtual pop was there's always room for great coffee. It can fit anywhere, even places you least expect it. And so we thought, well, where could you create a coffee shop that you wouldn't expect to be drinking it? And it should be iced because it's summer, and we just talked about Gen Z's drinking preferences. And so our creative agency had this crazy idea to turn the Ferris wheel, the little gondolas on the Ferris wheel, into iced coffee cafes. And we were able to do that because this machine is so tiny and it could sit literally on the table in the gondola with you. And so we took over the pier and the Ferris wheel for a day, invited a ton of influencers and opened it up to the public to say, go for a ride on the Ferris wheel and have a nice coffee. Did you ever think you could do that? And it's that unexpected nature that's so fun about it. And I've never seen influencers who are not required to post content for you, like so excited. They were like, this was the most fun day ever. And it's because we created an experience for them. We didn't try and sell them or have them sell that machine. We said, come have fun for a day with the brand. Like, how refreshing is that?
And different.
Yeah.
Never thought of drinking coffee on a Ferris wheel.
Right.
Up top.
It was fun. Let me tell you. It was also my birthday, fun fact.
Oh.
The day we did it. And I actually chose to work that day because it was such a cool idea.
Very awesome.
Fun personal anecdote.
Well, you brought up George Clooney earlier. We got to talk about George.
My close personal friend.
And he has been an ambassador for Nespresso for some time.
17 years or something like that, I think.
Love the recent commercial with where he lost his car.
Yes, the bet.
Yeah, the bet.
He made a bet with Julia Garner and he lost because she's Ruthie and she's ruthless.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a nice way to tie in George Clooney, who for some of us, I guess older people, we've grown up with him, and bringing in some of that younger personality, that younger feel in terms of audience. How did you guys come up with that idea?
Yeah. So the approach to advertising with George has always been in this space of pairing him with someone in sort of a storytelling format. He's a Hollywood guy after all, right? He likes to tell the story. He's always sort of the butt of the joke. That's who he is. Yeah. And we never want to stray away from who he is to his core, because that's really what sells. That's what has created a lot of our positioning, is if it's good enough for George, of course, right? Yeah. But we knew, especially as the US a few years ago, that we needed to age down a little bit. Not that he isn't wonderful, but the new generation knows him, but doesn't think of him as maybe like a cultural driver or, you know, a tastemaker in their life. They respect him, I think, from our data, but how to make them think about us in a new and different way, especially Gen Z. And so we thought, you need younger and you need more diverse. So we paired Julia and Simone Ashley from Bridgerton, if you know her. We did a ton of consumer research to see who might play off well with him and who might create the right associations with a younger demographic as you think about pairing George with someone. So it was really intentional to think about that, and who we chose, how they operate at George's level, right? Like, you're not going to put George Clooney next to an influencer, even though an influencer on TikTok might be like the ideal person to reach Gen Z. We can work with them in different ways, but that's not going to make sense, nor would it be at the caliber of a George TV commercial. So it was a tough needle to thread, but it ended up working out really well. And the storyline of them playing off of each other was able to be elevated, playful, but maintain sort of this fresh approach to your typical TV advertising, I think. I
love the commercial.
Thank you.
Awesome.
It's a fun one.
Well, let's step away from coffee. Let's do some non-coffee talk.
I'm good with that.
You know, and I was telling you a little bit earlier, I really loved that mantra that you have, and you had it on a podcast. It was, every yes is a no to something else.
Yeah.
And when I was listening to that podcast, you know, my kids were on the couch, and it hit home for me. You know, for, you know, the staying at the office an extra hour to get a couple things done, and missing that hour with my child, or my children, I should say. So, but tell us a little bit about that, because it was, when you said it, it was special to me. So, you know, I think it'd be great to share with the audience.
Yeah, I think maybe the place to start is that I'm a mom of young kids too, and I was very lucky early in my career when I was working in advertising to be surrounded by, like, really lucky, really powerful women all the way up the chain. I worked in a full team of women, most of whom had young kids. And I learned really early on that, like, work also has to have, like, it takes up so much of your time and your effort, and it can take away from other things. I worked crazy hours when I worked in advertising, and I was in it because I was in my 20s, and you don't know any different. And now, as a mom of young kids in this, you know, seemingly high-powered position, every choice you make is demonstrating to your family, your friends, and your team, right? Your direct reports, your extended team, what it means, and is it possible to do make the impact you want to make and still have a life outside of work. And I did not write that mantra. I wish I did. It's out there in the world, and it's stuck with me as a mantra to say, I hate the term work-life balance. It's really overused, and what does it mean? And so I needed it to be practical to me in every day. I'm a typical yes person. I want to show up. I want to do things like this, but choosing to do this means what? That you've pleased the people. Hopefully you've made an impact on an audience, but maybe more importantly, what does it mean to the things around that? And we're all juggling things. And so it's a trade-off.
Yeah. Oh, that was a great way and I agree with you. Work-life balance, it means different things to different people. And, you know, that is something I'm going to carry with me as I, you know, sort of make decisions about how I navigate my day, my week, my month. You know, what am I saying yes to? And what am I saying
inherently
on the other end? So
yeah, that's great.
I don't want to. I'm done.
I think we are wrapping it up here.
Really? Oh, no questions. Oh, I'm sorry. I hogged all your time. I'm so sorry, everyone. Can we take one question? I don't know if anyone
we can take a quick
question.
Any burning questions? Yeah, it's such a good question. Actually, my CEO just last night, we were talking about this topic, and he said, Whoever thought 30 years ago you could sell coffee in a boutique? Nobody. I mean, that's not where the category was consumed. And so I think it's that sort of innovation, pushing the boundary mindset. And at the end of the day, we're a commodity. Coffee is a commodity, but we have created, through all of the elements that go into the marketing mix, a luxury brand. And so if you switch from, like, I don't think I work in CPG. I mean, kind of inherently I do, but not really. I think of us as a D2C luxury brand. And so we just happen to sell coffee, but we're selling more of a dream and a lifestyle. And so that leads you to different decisions in experiential marketing, in all kinds of execution than you might if you were just, I'm a CPG brand. And yes, our large volume of our category, especially in machines, is sold with trade partners. But we know we have this one-to-one relationship once you start consuming our coffee that behooves us to act in a very different way. And I think it's that initial innovation mindset that drove us to create boutiques to sell coffee, that sticks with us today. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jessica and Almar.
Jessica, thank you.